Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Danyal Matthews. It's the Daily Grind, and we enter, of course, our scheduled segment with none other than the Money Council, the founder, Mr. Adnan Bazir. Now, Adnan has come on. Last week, we spoke about money in Islam, the history of money as it has, oh my word, tongue twister, as it has existed throughout human societies. We talked about how it first began as barter trade. There on, we even discussed how it became trading through shells, which was a simple means, and then we traded and all the way through to today, where we stand in modernity with fiat currency and online banking being as prevalent as it has been. And yeah, so today Adnan has come back with another topic of discussion. Adnan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, my brother.
Wa alaikum salam, Danyal, and to our beautiful viewers and listeners. Shukran for having me again.
No problem. How are you doing, Adnan?
Alhamdulillah, can't complain. We're in the month of December. I think things are starting to slow down now. We see
Yeah, eh?
schools have closed, and
Everything is
families are
closing
making their
down.
way,
Yeah,
for the holiday trips, etc.
I'm still riding the high of the World Cup final, which happened on Sunday
Yeah,
2 days ago.
of course. Yeah.
I'm still riding that wave. That was an absolutely exciting match. But anyway, Adnan, it's still before we digress into that whole
Yes.
beautiful game. Adnan, can you just enlighten us on what we are speaking about today?
Sure. I mean, so most of our viewers and followers would have been obviously, following the World Cup, the football, but on the other side of the continent, from the North Americans, particularly in the US, and more so fine tuning. Danielle, I don't know if you know about an island called Antigua and Barbuda.
Antigua and Barbuda. I have no clue what that is, my brother.
Where that is
Where
located.
is it? Is that maybe
Yeah.
in the Caribbean?
Yeah, that's right. It's a little small island off the coast of Puerto Rico. And that is where one of the largest cryptocurrency platforms is registered as a company, right? As a service provider. And that platform is known as, or formerly known as, FTX Trading, Futures Exchange Trading. And this company was started by, and for our viewers and people that have been following the news in the cryptocurrency space, has probably been one of the biggest failures, a business failure of a platform that operates in the space. And the founder, by the name of Sam Bankman-Fried, also known as SBF, has basically been arrested for this scandal that has unfolded. So I'd like to focus on, in this session, just to reflect on what has actually transpired by the failure and the downfall of FTX as a platform, and then just bringing it back home in terms of our teachings and understandings when we're talking about wealth and having barakah in your wealth, and some of the key principles around that.
Yes. Adnan, I've actually heard about this whole situation. It's kind of hard to ignore it. It's been almost everywhere. I've seen it. I've seen shorts on TikTok and on Insta and longer videos on YouTube where they kind of explain it. And I still can't actually wrap my head around it because, in all honesty, it sounds so bizarre and so bewildering that somebody could get away with what he got away with. In actual fact, with many schemes, it's often embarrassing, or rather you get secondhand embarrassment knowing that people invested with these individuals that are clearly untrustworthy. All the way back with that one individual, I forgot his name now, did that the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. Bernie Madoff, I think it was. Was it Madoff?
Sorry?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
And how he basically got people in social circles. He didn't actually have big. He actually went through them personally, and they took off just his reputation alone. They didn't actually evaluate his books. He often at times utilized his connections in the community to convince him to come through. But
Yes.
with this situation, if I'm not mistaken, it's a little bit different because he actually tricked pretty big people in the financial industry, actually tricking hedge fund managers to invest in his company. Am I correct?
You're right, Anal. So maybe just to create some context and start the discussion. So Sam Bankman-Friedman, a 30-year-old American, studied at MIT, He operates in a t-shirt and a shorts, as just his modus operandi. The typical Silicon Valley type of entrepreneur in the fintech space. He started off with a company called Alameda Research, which focused on financial research, economic research, fintech research, etc. And this was in 2017 when he started this business. So primarily a research company. And then in 2019, he, with some other co-founders, started FTX, Futures Exchange, which is was a cryptocurrency platform and the second largest in the world up until 2021, 22. And they compete with the likes of Binance and Coinbase, which are famous and well-known platforms globally. We see them advertising in all forms of sports, during adverts, billboards, sponsorships, etc. So FTX was a major player. I mean, in 2021, they reported over $1 billion in revenue. I mean, that's massive. If we look at the growth over the period, if you just look at the major cryptocurrencies and the trading revenue over the last 3 years. So when they started in 2019, they started off at 720 million, and then they moved over to 850 million. And as of 2021, they exceeded $1 billion in revenue. So if we now look at what has unfolded, and all of this has really transpired from the beginning of November 2022, we're literally talking about a month ago, right? Where FTX, being one of the largest crypto exchanges, and with the sister company Alameda Research being one of the biggest holders on the platform. So FTX is an exchange that is essentially a marketplace that is bringing together sellers of different cryptocurrencies, right? Because you have hundreds of different cryptocurrencies, and obviously the largest one being Bitcoin, and then you have Ethereum, and then Solana, etc., etc. And then on the other side of the exchange or the platform is what you have being investors or buyers. So that could be retail investors, so individuals like you and I, and then it can also be institutional investors, big pension funds, big hedge funds, investment managers that would look at investing and holding cryptocurrency through FTX as a platform. And the other platforms like Binance, Coinbase, pretty much operate in the same manner. But the one thing that made FTX quite unique was that they also had their own cryptocurrency or token, that being or known as FTT, the FTT token, right? And Alameda Research, which is the sister company that Sam Bankman-Fried co-founded, was a big holder of this token, right? So one, you have this exchange, and you have Alameda Research, which is a sister company to the platform, and they essentially are holding a big stake in FTX in terms of its tokenage or tokenization, right? And I mean, also just to give you some context of FTX, I mean, they were endorsed by celebrities globally. I mean, they had the likes of Tom Hardy from American football to Tim Curry in NBA to some of the actors and celebrity singers endorsing FTX as a platform. And this was a means of them advertising and branding and expanding their footprint, globally speaking. And what then unraveled through FTX as a platform was that some of the investors or co-investors in FTX then started looking closer at its annual financial statements that it was disclosing, right? And one of the biggest revelations through that was that Alameda Research was holding 14.6 billion US dollars of assets, and this was as at the financial year being June 2022, which was about 3 billion in FTT tokens,
Oh wow,
right?
3 billion. Wow,
So we're talking massive numbers here, right?
Adnan. That I'm actually taken aback by everything you said because this is actually extremely interesting. Everything you just mentioned, but we actually have to. I always have to do this, and it's always so shocking that the time has flown so fast.
So
We have to
far,
quickly go to some
sure.
commercial news. When we return, it's more of the daily grind. So stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Daily Grind. Before the break, talking to Adnan Bazid. He's still here, don't worry, he hasn't left us. And before the break, he was mentioning FTX, Alameda Research, SBF or Sam Bankman-Fried, the owner of it, and mentioning or basically describing how the entire Ponzi scheme, as it basically is, functioned. Adnan, just before we ended, you mentioned that FTX was trading in its own coin called FTT token, and was
Yes,
trading in that. But also, you mentioned that in actual fact, their sister company, Alameda Research, a company that you mentioned was engaged in financial research,
yes,
investment, things of
yes,
that nature. You mentioned that they actually held a large sum of those tokens in their own system, and they were actually trading with it. You
yes,
mentioned there a couple of billion there. I can't get the number correct. Can you just
yes.
surprise me again by mentioning how massive the amount they had, or rather they were trading?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, according to their financials in June 2022, which was literally about 6 months ago, they disclosed a figure of 14.6 billion US dollars of assets on the Alameda Research financials, and about over 3 billion US dollars were held in FTT tokens
Oh,
that was issued by FTX.
wait.
So,
So break that down for me, just Mark.
sure.
For So you mentioned how many billion there? 14 billion. I'm so
14
used to
billion,
saying
yeah,
million.
call it 15 billion. So roughly about
15 billion.
25% of the assets were held in the FTT token. So, I mean, what's clear here is that you have two companies or entities that have been founded by the same founder, right?
Oh,
And the one is serving the other one's interest, right?
uh,
And that was pretty much some of the accusations that were made,
oh wow. Wait,
and that
Adnan,
also,
that sounds like if I was putting my money with a bank, and
yes,
of course, you're putting money with the bank. Of course, most of the time the money isn't always there. Of course, the 100 you put in, they obviously use and they reappropriate it for investments for themselves, to make money for themselves.
yes,
And of
yes.
course, they also utilize all of that. Of course, all of that is already disclosed
Mm,
in the
mm,
financial agreement and in the terms of service.
mm.
So it's not bewildering to see money being paid by a financial institute that has been given
Yes,
to them under the premise of a
yes,
bank. But
yes.
what you're mentioning there seems rather dubious because if I'm
Certainly.
not wrong to follow here, essentially you put your money with, let's say, one bank. The bank has another company that does investments not under their name. It's completely a separate company. The only thing holding them together is the reality that the owner is the operator of both,
Yes.
and he's using the money from the bank to finance its investments. Would that not be? I'm not wrong to think that's a little bit illegal, because I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think that would, like, unless they
The,
disclosed that beforehand, but I don't think they would if they got into trouble for this. Am I correct?
look, those are the I mean, now, right? December 2022. We know it's public news that Sam Bankman-Fried has been arrested in the Bahamas island with charges of counts of charges that was issued by United States government, or at least the regulators, and one of those were obviously fraud and misappropriation of funds. And also, I mean, further to that was the amount of leverage and risk exposure that FTX had as a business, that they were bailing out other smaller crypto platforms, right? That were modded, according to one of the video clips that was where SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, shortly known as, that a lot of these platforms were moderately backed. So, I mean, from an Islamic finance point of view, there is red flags around um, buying or acquiring a business
Yeah.
where it's moderately backed, meaning that it's sitting with a lot of debt on its books. There isn't physical assets or tangible assets that's backing that
Yeah.
balance sheet. And they're getting involved in risky ventures in
Yes.
terms of VCs, because this was another avenue that they were exploring as
Ah,
Alameda Research. So
Adnan,
there was a,
one thing
yeah,
that strikes me here is you see these companies you mentioned Binance, you mentioned FTX, they all were basically trading in the exact same realm, and we all know, watching sport as you mentioned, these companies have essentially tried to legitimize themselves in
mm,
the financial space
yes,
and in
yeah,
basically social circles by
yeah,
engaging in these kind of practices of
yeah,
sponsoring and so on, making themselves look legitimate, because as you know and as we've mentioned
yeah,
before, there are a lot of scams or rug pulls as they call it in the crypto space where people basically cheat others and all that kind of stuff. Now, this company was trying to make itself legitimate, but also it kind of wasn't it? Because in the beginning you mentioned that they were actually getting investment from hedge fund
yes,
managers, which is something that is not at all easy to gain investment from. I mean, the amount of you. First of all, it's kind of taken aback that they could actually be fooled, because you'd assume, if a car mechanic can fool you in charging you an overpriced amount, but a car mechanic can't usually fool another car mechanic because they know the trade too well. But they actually
certainly,
fooled them as
certainly,
well. And I'm just taken
yeah,
aback by that. And I think it's also tied to what you mentioned there, the amount of leverage they were given, the amount of interest they were promising back to investors. It
yes,
seems too good to be true. It literally sounds what you mentioned in the beginning when we first started this all the way back months ago. We mentioned that if it sounds too good to be true, it
yeah,
probably isn't. And I'm kind of
yeah,
trying to figure out what motivated these big investment guys, these financial gurus,
yeah,
to actually engage in this like completely
sure,
insane
sure.
investment.
Yeah, yeah. Daniel, the one thing is that you're able to buy and trade on these platforms and investing, trading, buying and selling different cryptocurrencies. But a level further to that is the derivative space, where you're now hedging against certain bets, right? So if you believe that Bitcoin is going to run in the price, you want to hedge it, hedge for that benefit. And if Bitcoin is going to fall, you want to hedge against that. So these are derivative instruments that are then adopted by hedge fund managers, that are adopted by brokerages. And FTX was a big player in the space. It was the fourth largest derivatives cryptocurrency exchange platform. So, having said that, you can see there's a lot of speculative
Mm,
instruments that were underlying the cryptocurrency market. And
so
because
true.
cryptocurrencies is still very much unregulated, um, there's a it's somewhat of a cowboy market, right?
Mm,
At this stage, where there's still a lot of speculation, and still a lot
yeah.
of uncertainty. There's not enough governance, not enough regulation to kind of guide the operators that are playing in the space.
No,
Let
truly.
alone let
Yeah.
alone the regular investors like you and I. And one of the things that I caution people to take, I guess, very little from is when you see celebrities
Mm,
like footballers and athletes and actors and actresses endorsing a financial investment platform. Um, to me, if they don't carry credibility and expertise in that space, and
yeah.
they haven't actually conducted a due diligence
Mm,
on that service provider or product provider, then what credibility can they offer you other
exactly.
than them being incentivized to talk about that
Yeah.
platform?
No, truly, Adnan. I think the appointment, because for those that don't know, FTX did not only appoint, as Adnan mentioned, sports people. They actually employed financial gurus in some sort of way to actually promote the platform as well. The promotion was actually quite prevalent,
Yeah.
and it's kind of bewildering that individuals could actually stand by something that they didn't do their own due diligence on. But anyway, we're gonna have to go for some more commercial news. I know it's shocking how quickly this is going. We'll dive
Yes.
more into this. So stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Daily Grind. Before the break, we're talking about this whole FTX scandal that Adnan had mentioned in regards to a scandal that is taking the crypto space by storm when individual had, in lack of a better terms, stolen billions of dollars of investment. Well, not all the stolen, rather lost that amount of money, because stolen would imply that he
Correct.
actually still has
Yeah.
it. He doesn't
Yeah.
have it. It's
Yes.
completely lost. But that is a whole other story. But Adnan, before the break, you were mentioning derivatives. You were
Yes.
mentioning how these hedge
Yeah.
fund managers were basically enticed by their greed. I mean,
Yeah.
as we've mentioned before, when you mentioned the reality of engaging in these kind of practices, you mentioned one thing, one derivative. I remember it was called CDF. I think
Yeah.
you mentioned as
Yes.
a derivative, and you were saying that the percentage that you one could yield from it is quite high, about 20% or something. And I was mentioning, and we were actually talking about it, that the reality is, that if you told someone, listen here, man, if you give me 100 rand, I guarantee you in 3 months that 100 rand will be 500 rand. They will probably invest everything that they have at the time, just to get that amount of money, get that
Yes.
amount of
Yes.
yield. Is that
Yeah.
amount of yield realistic? Of course not. That's kind of insane to get that amount of money back. For the person to do that, they probably be, I don't know, either scamming you, or genius of unparamounted appeal. But anyway, Adnan, one thing you
Danielle,
mentioned.
I think for the benefit of this conversation, and
Yes.
what has really come to the downfall for FTX is not so much as to the proposition that FTX was offering investors,
Yeah.
right? In terms of invest, that wasn't the issue necessarily. The
Mm.
issue was that when operators and big investors started seeing the financial statements that were
Yeah.
disclosed
Mm.
by both FTX and Alameda Research, the research company which is
Yeah.
the underlying holder of the FTT coins, right,
Yeah.
which were the sister companies. When they started seeing that the balance sheets don't look right,
Yeah.
right? The assets that the companies were holding, and
Mm.
that it was over leveraged in FTT coins.
Mm.
And what then came from that was around about beginning of November, we saw the CEO of Binance, right?
Yeah.
The Asian guy, I can't get to his name offhand, but the Binance CEO, he then publicized on Twitter that he's going to do a withdrawal from the FTX platform. And they did a withdrawal in the range of about 4 million US dollars, right? And then this led to a ripple effect by other investors also pulling out of the FTT coin and FTX platform. And
Yeah.
what came from that was then a liquidity crunch. They were not able to then fund investors. And
Uh.
now you're sitting with a liability that is beyond what the company or the platform is able to fund its investors. And that's what then realizes
Uh.
into a liquidity crunch.
What it doesn't
And we saw,
doesn't that stuff usually happen with banks? I'm pretty sure.
yeah,
I'm going
exactly.
back to
And
like high school economics. Run. I think
yeah,
it's called run-ons, I believe.
but if we yes, if we think about decentralized finance, if we think about the objective of what cryptocurrency is supposed to serve as, you then have you have this oligopoly, right? Many small or few players that basically own the entire market, like the Coinbase, like the Binance, like the FTX, that it's actually not decentralized. It's actually centralized to a few players.
Mm.
And because of that, when you have investors pulling out, in a space of, I mean, it was like 3 to 4 days, where
Wow.
people were doing withdrawal requests, it's a run on that platform, and they don't have enough liquidity,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
also that contributed to the downfall.
But that.
Um,
But in all honesty, just like I mentioned, the aspect of the look, and now you mentioned the look and all that. I'm just trying to really honestly wrap my
yes.
head around the stupidity of the, or rather the incompetence of these financial gurus, of all of these people, to trust these people with their money. I mean,
Yes.
you already described him in the beginning as a man that wears a three-quarter pants,
Yeah.
sweatshirt, walks around like
Yeah.
that. Your
Yeah.
typical nerd,
Yeah.
tech genius, basically, as they
Yeah.
usually, they don't really,
Yeah.
they usually look, rather, they don't really look the part, or rather of the
Yeah.
genius. But
Yeah.
it's kind of bewildering to me that people could trust this individual with their money. Because a lot of the time, like you mentioned in the beginning, or rather at the end of the last segment, you're trusting these individuals that while they sound good, they sound like they know what they're talking about, they sound like
Yeah.
they are reputable individuals. They don't really have a history of forward. I mean, what is a football star going to know about saving money? That guy
Yeah.
doesn't know how to save money most of the
Yeah.
time because most of his investments are handled by people that he pays that know more than he
Exactly.
does. And it's
Exactly.
it's bewildering to me
100%.
because this entire scam just seems to all be tied to greed
Yes.
from HBF and FTX in utilizing their clients' money to fund their own investments, greed from the financial gurus that invested and thought,
Yes.
they're going to make these big yields, greed from normal
Yes.
individuals that invested because of the high interest rate. And I think that
Yes.
sends back to our initial discussion that we had so many times ago. Rather, the common thread that we always try to push through is that,
Mm.
you should, while something may seem good and your mind can run wild with it, playing for greed usually ends up leading to
Mm.
a massive disaster. But I think that's wisdom that is not only our own, it's quite literally the wisdom of our Nabi Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and our deen
Sallallahu
as a
Alaihi Wasallam.
whole, which is
Yes.
why we
Yes.
don't engage in riba in the first place, correct?
Yes, 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 Danyal. I mean, you've hit it head on the nail. At the premise of it, it's greed, and I mean that is one of through history, right? Through history of markets, one of the key principles is that you want to buy, low, and you want to sell high. But what drives that is investor psychology, right? And one of the premises to that is fear that's driven and greed, right? That you want to sell high, and that is kind of stimulated by greed, and you want to buy low, that is typically driven by fear or the inverse of that. So that's
Yeah.
one of the key tenets to investor behavior. But coming back to our reflection of FTX and this whole scandal that has unfolded during November of this year, is that yes, bringing it back to key principles and teachings that we can rely on and has been proven through the test of time. There's one of the key things that we focus on as Muslims, and this is not just an Islamic, I guess, principles and values that one can live by. Is to look at your earnings, how you're earning your wealth, number one, how you're spending that wealth, and then number three, also how you're saving and investing that wealth for your life in this world and beyond, right? Um, and then that also speaks to the intention that you have, right? Are you thinking about the short term and making a quick buck and responding to the short-termism mindset that we see a lot in today's time through social media, through the crypto space, etc. And then also avoiding key principles when looking at the economics, looking at investments, looking at making money decisions as a whole. Number one, just looking at usury, right? And riba is not just interest when we're talking about earning or paying an interest. It's much more than that, right?
Mm.
And then looking at elements of uncertainty and deception in transactions, whether you're doing, just a sale deal between you and a customer versus a financial transaction. And then thirdly is looking at elements of gambling and
Mm.
speculation, basically taking a chance, in other words, and hoping for the best, throwing darts on a dartboard and hoping that you're going to hit bullseye. Those
Yeah.
elements you can bring back to your money decisions and your financial and investment decisions that you make also. And like you said, Daniel, it's important that you speak to experts, seek the advice from
Mm.
counselors, whether it's your Islamic scholars, bankers, investment managers, people that have some level of expertise. And I always refer back to the 10,000 hour rule. If you haven't spent that time in terms of years in studying a certain subject matter, right, and you have the qualifications and the necessary professional discipline, then then it begs the question whether you can speak with some level of authority on a certain topic.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Adnan, it's come to the end of the segment. It's usually, as I always say, bewilderingly fast, how fast we get through all of this. But Adnan, shukran so much for coming on board, for enlightening us about this major scam, which is to me quite hilarious that it even took place. But anyway, Adnan, if anybody else there wants to know how to get in contact with you so they can get some financial advice or maybe check out some of your content, how can they do so?
Yes. Sure. Yeah, you can catch me on YouTube, my YouTube channel, The Money Council. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and then my website is www.themoneycouncil.co.za, and you can DM me on any of these platforms.
Fantastic. Adnan, shukran so much for coming on board. We really, really appreciate it. For all of the
Afwan.
wonderful listeners, stay tuned to the Daily Grind. There's more to come. For now, we go for some commercial news. Stay tuned.